Hello again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave and in this video I'm going to be answering a question that was sent in by Jason over in Canada. So Jason's question was, it's a compound question, I never seem to get an answer for that I can understand. What's the difference between modes and scales and how does a player decipher which to use and or how to use them? Okay, now that's a really good question. It's something I've covered so many times before with different students, but the way that question's phrased, actually, it's quite good. It gets us right into the heart of the subject. What's the difference between scales and modes? Let's start talking a bit about what a scale is. Now, sometimes people think of scales just in terms of notes, but I think it's sometimes more useful to think of the scales in terms of intervals. So you start from a root note and then you go up in a certain set of intervals. So in the case of a major scale, for example, you start on the root note, then you go up a whole tone, then a whole tone, then semitone, a whole tone, a whole tone, a whole tone, and a semitone gets you back to the root. So say if you start from a C root note, go up a whole tone, gets you to a D, another whole tone, gets you to E, a semitone, gets you to F, a whole tone, gets you to G, up another whole tone, gets you to A, another whole tone, B, and then semitone, and you're back to C. And that's the C major scale. So you start from the C root note, go up in that set of intervals, and you end up with the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And if you're playing in the key of C major, then what you're doing is you're using notes from the C major scale. If you want to get creative, you can use outside notes, but in terms of just like diatonic playing, only using notes from the key, then you'd only be playing using those 7 notes. Could be from different octaves, but in terms of note names, it's only those 7 notes. Okay, so that's our building block. That's our scale of the key, if you like, the major scale. But as you know, in a key, you've got a number of chords, and if you start to think about where those chords come from, this gets you into the world of modes. So think about what the word mode actually means. You know, you talk about something operating in a particular mode. Mode in this context, it is, you can think of it as meaning like a function. How is the scale functioning? So let's stay in the key of C major and think about the second degree in the key of C major, which is D. Okay, now what we want to do is build a chord on that key, a chord on that note, and we have to use notes that belong to the key. So we can only take notes that belong to the key. So let's do that now. Let's write out the notes from the key, but starting from a D root note. Okay, that gives us these notes. And if we take alternate notes, because that's what we do when we build chords, which is taking alternate notes from a scale, we get D, F, A, and C. Now those are the notes of the D minor 7 chord. And that's the second chord in the key of C major. And we can do this across all the notes in the scale. So we're basically taking alternate notes and that from those scales there, and that gives us this case, we're just working with 7 chords, but it gives us a C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7 or G dominant 7, A minor 7, B half diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5, and then back to C major 7. So 7 notes in the scale, 7 notes in the key, and each one of those has chords built on it. Now we could be building basic triads, or 7 chords, 9 chords, all sorts of different extensions and whatnot, but any chord built off the second degree of the scale will only use notes from the key. So let's look at the intervals between the notes on each of those degrees. So if we look at the D there, we're going up a whole tone, a semitone, a whole tone, a whole tone, a whole tone, a semitone, and then a whole tone gets us back to the root. And we can look at that across all of the notes in the scale, all the notes in the key, and you'll see that the pattern of intervals between the notes in each case there is unique. And what you've got there is actually the 7 modes. There's a scale that's built on each degree of the scale, in each degree of like the parent key scale, and that is, it's a mode, it's a function of the note starting from a particular degree of the scale. So when you play a D minor 7 chord in the context of the key of C major, what you're actually playing is a Dorian mode chord. Dorian? Yeah, because each of these scales, it's a unique set of intervals, but they've got a name. So the second degree there has a unique formula, and that's Dorian mode. Third degree, Phrygian mode. Fourth degree, Lydian. Fifth degree, Mixolydian. Sixth degree is Aeolian, and the seventh degree is the Locrian. That's just the name for that group of intervals, that scale, if you like. Because modes themselves are scales. They're groups of notes separated by a particular pattern of intervals. And the name of the scale, or the name of that mode, tells you the pattern of intervals. The first degree has got a mode on it as well. It's called the Ionian Mode. The formula of the Ionian Mode is the same as the formula of the major scale. But what you're thinking of there, again, you think of what the term mode means. It means function. What you've got there when you're thinking about that in terms of an Ionian mode, you're thinking about what are the notes from the C major scale, how they're functioning when you start from the C note. In the same way that we're thinking about how do the notes of the C major scale function when you start from D note, well, they function in a Dorian mode, and so on. Yes, the names are a bit weird, but just kind of stick with it. They are what they are. So that's what modes are. You said, what's the difference between modes and scales? Well, it's funny to think in terms of a difference, because as we've just shown, a scale is a group of intervals between notes. So a mode is a scale of some sort. But when you look at that first degree of the scale, it has a mode as well. So all modes are scales, but all scales are modes as well. So try not to get too hung up in the semantics of it, but basically that's what a mode is. It's the notes of a key functioning from a particular root note. So how do you use them? That was the second part of the question. Really, was how do you decipher? How do you figure out where you're going to use a mode? Well, we already sort of touched on it, because we said that each chord in a key comes from a mode. So let's look at a really common progression. Look at, say, a 6-2-5-1 progression. So in the key of C major, go from A minor 7 chord to D minor 7 chord to a G7 chord, and then to a C major 7 chord. That's a really common chord progression. So it's the 6th chord of the key, to the 2nd chord of the key, to the 5th chord of the key, back to the 1 chord. And as I said, those notes, the notes in those chords, you can think of them as belonging to the mode that occurs on that degree of the scale. So that A minor 7 chord, it's the 6th degree of the scale, so it's the 6th mode. It's the Aeolian mode that we use to take a 1, a flat 3, 5 and a flat 7 to give us that A minor 7 chord. It's the D Dorian mode, that's the mode on the 2nd degree, where we take 1, a flat 3, a 5 and a flat 7 to give us that D minor 7 chord. On the 5th degree we've got a G, so the G Mixolydian mode, we take the 1, 3, 5 and flat 7 from that to give us that distinctive sounding dominant 7 chord. And then the 1 chord, we can think of that as coming from the C Ionian mode, the first mode of the major scale. A 1, 3, 5 and 7 gives us the C minor 7 chord. And if I play that progression through, what I could say, well, I want to play a melody line over the top of that. So where would I use modes? I would say, well, I can think modally, and over that 6th chord, over that A minor 7 chord, I can play the 6th mode. I can play the A Aeolian mode. When the chord progression moves to the D minor 7 chord, I'm now playing a 2 chord, so I can use the 2nd mode. I can use D Dorian to play over the top of that D7 chord, D minor 7 chord. When I go to the G7 chord, that's the 5 chord of the key, the Mixolydian chord, so I can use the G Mixolydian mode over the top of that. And then when I move up to the C major 7 chord, I can use the C Ionian mode. It's the 1 chord, so I'll use the 1 mode. Now, you might start to get a bit confusing, because you might be thinking, well, all those modes all have the same notes in, so how do I make the distinction when I'm playing a Aeolian or D Dorian or a G Mixolydian or a C Ionian? And really what it's about is the notes that you rest on. So if you tend to play like arpeggio patterns out of those modes, or you tend to rest on the first degree of the mode. So when you're playing over that A minor 7 chord, you might rest more or emphasize the A, or maybe it's the fifth degree, the E, or the flat third degree, the C. Gives you like this the stronger chordal tone, so it'll emphasize the sound of the mode. And you can do that over any chord. If you know what degree of the scale the chord comes from, you know which mode belongs to that key, to that degree of the key, and you can use that mode over that chord. That's the most the most simplistic way of thinking about it. Just use the mode that belongs to the chord. Okay, now another way you can think about using modes is if you've got a strong bass note or something, you could use that to suggest the mode to you. So let's say we're playing in the key of C major here. So let's say I had an F major chord, just plain old F major, and a G major chord. So they're both chords from the key of C major. I've got the 4 chord there and the 5 chord. Now if I was playing the F major, you could say, well, I should be using the F Lydian over the top of that, and then when I play the G chord, I play the G Mixolydian over the top of that. But if I play them both with a D in the bass, so that D, your ear tends to get drawn to the lowest note. So what you're hearing in terms of the F major chord and the G major chord, D bass note, you're hearing notes from the key of C major, but the bass note is telling you D, so your ear's drawn to that, so it gives the piece like a Dorian sort of tonality. So in that case, if I had that chord vamp going on, I could play a solo over the top of that just using the D Dorian mode. So that's another option. Think about what bass note you've got, because that tends to draw your ear a little bit more, and so that suggests the mode. Okay, so there's a couple of ways you can apply modes. Can't finish a tutorial talking about scales without mentioning the pentatonic. Actually, I think there's a tutorial about the pentatonic where Jason sent this question in, so it's worth mentioning. Pentatonics, there's 2 types of pentatonic. There's a major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. Called pentatonic, pent meaning 5. These scales have only got 5 notes in them. You've got a major pentatonic, which is a 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, and the root. And there's also the minor pentatonic, which is a 1, a flat 3, a 4, 5, and a flat 7, and the root. Thinking in terms of intervals, you've got an interval of a whole tone, a tone and a half, a whole tone, a tone and a half in the major pentatonic, or you've got a tone and a half, a whole tone, a tone and a half, then a whole tone again in the minor pentatonic. But yeah, just think of them now in terms of the notes involved. The formula of them, you've got 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 in the major pentatonic, and 1, flat 3, 4, 5, and flat 7 in the minor pentatonic. Now, what's interesting to note about these is look at the notes in the pentatonic scales and look at the notes in the modes. So as you can see, the 3 major, what we call the major modes, the modes that have a third degree in them, a natural third, all have the notes of the major pentatonic in them. So you can think of the pentatonic as being like a skeleton for any of the modes, and likewise the 3 minor modes, the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Aeolian, the modes that have a flat third and a 5th degree, they all share the notes of the minor pentatonic. So that means any way that you can play a major mode, you can play the Ionian mode, the Lydian mode, or the Mixolydian, you can use the corresponding major pentatonic. In any case where you'd be playing the minor mode, the Dorian, the Phrygian, or the Aeolian, you could use the corresponding minor pentatonic. That's quite useful, actually sometimes for playing through key changes. So if you've got a key change, you know, the note, as you move from one key to another, there'll be some differences in notes, but you might have so like in one key you've got the D Dorian mode, and then you do a key shift, and you end up the new key is going to have a D Phrygian mode. Well, if you could play the D minor pentatonic from when you're in the first key, still playing the D minor pentatonic through the key change, and that minor pentatonic in the first instance is functioning as a Dorian scale, and then after the key change what you're actually hearing is the skeleton of the D Phrygian mode, and you've done the key transition, and then you can start playing more modally within the second key. It's just something to experiment with. And anyway, you can use the minor pentatonic, you can use the minor blues scale, so you can introduce outside notes like the flat fifth. But we're starting to get off topic a little bit with that. Okay, so hopefully that clears up some of the mystery. What's the difference between scales and modes? Well, there really isn't one. Scales can function as modes, and modes themselves are scales. There's groups of notes separated by intervals. What you need to think about is how a particular scale is functioning, and that's the mode. And there's also a few ideas there for how you can approach playing lead lines modally by thinking about what chord you're playing over, or what bass note you've got, and what mode that suggests, and then that you've got those modes at your disposal. If you're not familiar with actually how to play the scales, download yourself a copy of PhatPhish from the PhatPhish website. It can be a little bit daunting when you first look at it and you've got the all scales setting, because there's just loads of scales in there. But there's groupings, and you can function in on modes of the major scale, or modes of the natural minor, modes of the harmonic minor, whatever. And that'll show you where the notes of those modes are on the fingerboard, and more importantly, you can annotate the display in terms of scalar tones, so you can see how a note from the key might be functioning if you're looking at it in terms of the Ionian mode, if you're looking at that note when it's functioning within the Dorian or the Phrygian or whatever. Okay, thanks for watching. If you've got a question or something you want to suggest for a future video, then if you go here, there's a form you can fill in, send your question in, I'll try and get around to answering it in a future video. You can leave a comment below, but it's probably best not to ask questions down there, because I don't always see comments that are left on videos, so your question might go unanswered. The form's a better way to get in touch with me. If you like the video, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it, please click subscribe, and you'll be notified next time I upload any other videos onto the PhatPhish Guitar Studio YouTube channel. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video next time. Bye for now.